Hey everyone, welcome to another video. So in the last video we replaced the rear shocks on the driver's side of my car, and I was going a little bit through the process of how to set up your shock absorbers and the spring so that you can ensure that you get the full travel of the shock absorber without affecting the wheel rubbing against the chassis when it bottoms out, whenever you go over a speed bump or any kind of pothole, whatever, on the road. So in today's video we're going to go over the front shocks, which is a little bit more complex because I have a McPherson strut set up and it's a little harder to adjust versus the rear, which is a separate shock absorber and a spring. So in this video we're going to take a look at my shocks, and we're going to see how to adjust it so that it's similar to the rear. So let's go. Alright, so this is my shock. This is the front of my car. As you can see, this is a McPherson strut setup where the springs are around the shock absorber itself. So my shock absorber is mounted to the upright, which is what the wheel bolts to. And so we're going to do the same thing. We're going to see how much the shock absorber compresses until it hits the bump stop, which you can kind of see up there. It's kind of yellow. And there it is. So my rubber boot is torn, but it's not as bad as the rear. But basically we're gonna do the same thing. So what I'm gonna do is loosen these lock rings on the coilover, and I'm just gonna drop the spring all the way down. So as you can see, so that's the top of the strut mount. So inside here, of course, there's the bump stop. It's right there, kind of yellow. So I have a bump stop again. And so basically that's gonna, when the shock absorber bottoms out, meaning it travels the entire length up because of like a big bump or something on the road, so it will hit the bump stop, which is be up here. So this is the top hat. This one actually spins freely because my coilovers is a different setup. It doesn't have like a traditional top hat like most other coilovers, and this is actually free floating. So it's a different design, but it still operates the same way. So when this whole assembly moves up because of a bump in the road, and the tire basically moves all this up, this coilover, the shock absorber, will travel the entire length, and then it will bottom out with the bump stop up here. At that point, the shock absorber will be completely compressed. So what we want to do is we want to tune it and set it so that when this bottoms out, when this whole thing bottoms out, the top of the wheel will not interfere with the top of the fender line. So that's what we want to do. We don't need to set preload because preload doesn't do anything, because the spring will always compress at this rate. Preloading it won't do anything. A lot of people, when they install coilovers, they often adjust their ride height by adjusting this bottom ring, which adjusts this bottom portion of the coilover. But that's not correct, because when you're adjusting this guy, you're adjusting this relative to the shock absorber, not to the spring itself, right? Because when you adjust this, you're adjusting how much travel this assembly is moving up and down. By adjusting this, you will essentially bottom out a lot quicker, right? And you won't get the full travel of the whole suspension because of it. So the correct way to set it is to set the shock absorbers where it bottoms out, and you set that height, and this is you lock this one in. Then you adjust the ride height using the spring. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna basically use another jack. We're gonna jack this upright up. We can jack up on the lower portion of the control arm. So we'll jack the suspension up, and we'll try and go as far and see where it maxes out and hits the bump stop on the suspension. Let's do that. One thing I forgot to mention, that there is because this is adjustable damping, I forgot to set this down to soft. So I went ahead, turned it down all the way to its softest setting, so it'll be easier to compress the shock absorber. Actually, I think I'm gonna stop recording for tonight. It's already getting dark. What I'm gonna do is I'm just going to disassemble the top half of the coilover, because right now I'm having problems trying to jack up the upright, the bottom of the upright. I'm having a hard time because the wheel is a little bit in the way. So what I'm trying to do, I'm gonna go and disassemble the top half of the coilover, and then take out the spring itself, so that I know that I'm not hitting the spring, because right now I'm not certain, based on how far I can jack up the wheel. I'm not sure if I'm actually bottoming out, because I'm already lifting the car off the jack stand. I'm not entirely sure, but that's what I'm going to do tonight, and then I'll come back tomorrow, and hopefully something is working tomorrow. So see you guys tomorrow. Hey everyone, so it's the next day, and so I went and bought some parts, because upon disassembly of my coilover, I realized some of the parts were kind of degrading. So for example, so this is pretty much how my coilover assembly is for the 2008 Toyota Yaris. And so this actually goes here. So it goes here, and then it sits up against there. This is just a dust boot that goes around here. But essentially this is my top hat, and then this goes up into the assembly here, and then this is the body. The body sits here, and then this goes on the other side of the body inside the engine. And this basically keeps the coilover from falling out. And this is a nut that goes on top, and it just screws this guy down. So, but this is the assembly. But when I disassembled it last night and I took this off, you can see this bearing. There's a bunch of grease coming out, and actually it's very loose. There's a lot of play in this bearing. And so I went down to AutoZone, bought replacement bearings. So I'm actually going to replace these ones as well. And then from there we can actually go ahead and see how to properly adjust your coilover suspension. Since I already have it out of the car, I have the springs removed. And another thing I also forgot was that I had my anti-roll bar in the front that was still connected to the coilover, which is connected here. And I totally forgot about it. And so when I was trying to move the whole assembly up, I forgot that it was connected to the other side, which was still already assembled. So I was trying to jack the suspension all the way up, but then it wouldn't go all the way up because the other side was still connected to the roll bar on the front. So I realized that I was stupid. But yeah, so now we've got the coilover out of the car, got it disconnected and everything, so we're going to properly adjust it as if we were installing it brand new. So let's go. Alright, so while I was cleaning some stuff, I decided to go ahead and disassemble the other side, the driver's side of the car. And so basically this is how my coilover system is set up. So you can see springs, and then this is the top half, and this is the part that sits in between the body, which the body goes right here. Right, this comes off, and also has the same problem. There's a bunch of grease there. So I also bought a replacement for this side as well. So I bought two. So during this disassembly, I already noted that you can see that there's grease coming out of this bearing. It's actually like, there's a lot of play. So like I said, I actually went down to AutoZone this morning and got me a replacement part for these three, because they come in a little kit. So this is from KYB, and the little instructions. Alright, just tells you, basically it's all pictures. So what I actually needed, right, was the replacement bearing on the top. So this is the replacement bearing. I also got a replacement of the top hat, as well as this mount. So because I got these all brand new, might as well install them brand new, so I can actually get rid of these, throw these guys away. Even though these are still perfectly fine, I will probably hold on to these just in case I need a replacement down the line and I don't have one, so I can always reuse these. But this hack definitely needs to go. This is pretty much bad, so this will be tossed, but I will be replacing them with these brand new parts. So like I said, this is a brand new bearing. You can see there's barely any play. It just spins nice and freely, whereas the other one is actually like, you can see it goes up and down. It spins, of course. It spins freely, but there's a lot of play in this direction. Whereas this brand new one, there's no play. So this is good. So this will be going into the coilover as the new parts. This is, if anyone was wondering what spring I'm running, this is what I'm running. So this is a 62 ID. So 62 meaning the ID of this spring. 200 is the length of the spring in millimeters. So this is 200 millimeters. And 005 is actually rated for 5 kilograms. So this is a 5 kilogram spring. So meaning if you take the spring, you put 5 kilograms on top of it, this will compress 1 millimeter. And so if you put 10 kilograms, it will compress 2 millimeters, and so on and so forth. So this rate will always stay the same regardless of how much weight you put on it. So if you multiply this by, if you add more weight, it will compress a lot more. But basically, when a lot of people say they want to preload their coilovers, preloading doesn't really do anything, because you're only just setting it to a set compression, and regardless of that, the weight will always, the spring rate will always be the same because you're always compressing at a rate of 5 kilograms per 1 millimeter. So preload on your coilovers doesn't mean anything because the weight of the car will always be consistent. Alright, so we're gonna go ahead and reassemble the coilovers. So we're gonna put some anti-seize so that the bottom collar will go thread into here, and that just allows us to be able to disassemble it again later if it comes to it and it doesn't seize up. Alright, and we're just gonna start threading this on. So you can see it's the bottom end. So it just threads in. So this is the shock absorber going into the bottom lower mount, this which mounts to the uprights. So I've already gone ahead and set this to the previous height that it was at, sitting inside the lower perch. And then now we're gonna go ahead and thread the ring that locks it into place. This just goes in. And then take a spanner wrench and just take this, just so it's snug. Okay. Now I'm actually going to leave the spring off because what we're going to do later is take a look at how much it actually compresses. So now I'm actually going to install the parts that are necessary for the spring. That's going to be this guy. This is the lower locking ring. And then this is the upper ring where the spring sits. We'll leave that there for now. And then next, that's going to be the shock absorber. Right. Then what we need to install is a spacer. Then a brand new bearing goes on top, and our locking nut. So I'm not going to actually tighten this yet. There is a torque spec for this, but I'm not going to tighten it yet because I need to disassemble it later. So this will just be there to hold it in place. So let's just use this and just tighten this down. Just snug. And then this actually sits oh, did it wrong. I forgot to put that in. Yep. Forgot because this actually sits right in here. So then this whole thing rotates. So that actually goes together as an assembly. Now we can put the locking nut in. And we can tighten this down. Just snug. Alright. Then from here, it's just this guy, goes right on top. And then I can thread it up into the housing. Just be careful about all the wires, or not the wires. So this is the brake line right here, and then this is the brake sensor, ABS sensor. Just want to make sure you're aware of that. That's that. Okay, so I got the coilovers somewhat installed. It's not tightened down yet, but it's missing the spring because we're going to try and set it up correctly. Now, when it comes to bolting up the upright to the coilover, these are the stock bolts that the car came with, that hold the upright and the spindle and everything together with the strut. Now, previously I was actually running these camber bolts, so you can see that they have this little off-centered section in this bolt, and that basically allows it to adjust the camber, pulling the upright either inwards or outwards. Because of the design of the Yaris, it doesn't have an actual top mount to adjust camber, so I have to actually use these camber bolts, which are actually a pain in the butt to adjust because they require to take the wheels off, and then you adjust it, and then you tighten it, put the wheel back on, set it back on the ground, and then you check your camber, which is a little pain in the butt because that's a long process for me to actually perform. So for now, I'm actually just gonna reinstall the, so this is actually the camber bolts that I used, that I bought for my car. So I actually labeled it, so it says passenger side. I have another one for the driver's side. So these are the camber bolts that I bought. So it actually comes with another set right here, but I never use two. I only use one because I only wanted to adjust the top half. But this is the original bolt that went in the top, as I marked it with a T, so meaning top. So I'm going to reinstall this back into the upright, and then that way it allows for easier installation, and I can set my alignments and everything perfectly. Alright, so we're going to put this all together. We're going to leave the link that's connected to the anti-roll bar disconnected. That will ensure that we don't bottom out. Try to lift up on this and it's going to react on the other side. Because we just want to focus on the travel that this entire shock absorber will take when the wheel assembly is subjected to, like, say, a bump or a pothole in the road. So what we're going to do next is actually we're going to jack this up, and then we'll see how far this goes up, and until the shock absorber is in contact with the top mount. Alright, so right now I'm going to measure from the center here to the top of the fender. So this will be at full droop, meaning it's uncompressed. So we can go ahead and measure. I'm getting about 15 and a half. So right now at full droop we're getting 15 and a half. so I'm going to go ahead and raise it to full compression, and we'll see how the measurement then. Alright, so now we're at full compression. The shock absorber is fully engaged, and then now we can measure from here to here. So we're at about 11 1/4. So now I'm gonna go ahead and drop this back down. Okay, so now we're gonna go ahead and go in and adjust this bottom one, which is normally what people use to adjust the ride height versus the actual spring itself to adjust ride height. So what we're gonna do is gonna adjust this one, and we're gonna actually raise it up or low. We're gonna actually raise it up a little more because that would simulate dropping the ride height, right? So we're gonna go ahead and loosen this. Should be pretty easy. Right, so right now I'm gonna measure from the top of the coilover or the shock absorber to where the bottom is. So right now we are measuring, so it's about 8.5 from right up here to the bottom, top of this bottom mount. So we're actually gonna raise it quite a bit. Let's go from 8 1/4, or actually 8.5 to, let's go 8 inches. Let's see how much of half an inch makes a difference. Alright, and we have to remember that when we measured initially from this setup, from the middle of the spindle to the top of the fender at full compression, it was 11 1/4. So we're gonna see how much of a difference this actually makes when it's fully compressed. So we're just gonna spin this, and raise it up about half an inch, just to see how much of a difference it really makes. Alright, so now that we adjusted it, we essentially adjusted this so that this will simulate dropping the ride height. So we're gonna go ahead and lock this down. Using the spinner. Doesn't have to be tight yet, but just enough to lock it. Alright. And now we're gonna see how much it actually matters. Alright, so we're gonna take another measurement again. Remember, fully uncompressed, it's about, so now the new one would be 15 inches where we were versus 15.5, right? So now we go ahead and raise this up. Now we should be at 10 3/4. So you can see how much, just by adjusting this lower mount, actually affects how far this travels up. We're gonna actually mount my rim onto the wheel, and we'll actually see how much of a difference it actually makes. Alright, so I have my wheel temporarily mounted on, just using 2 lug nuts. And so I've reset the original height so that it measures from the top of the shock absorber to the bottom of the top of the bottom mount to be 8.5 like we had it before. So that's set, I locked it, and then now we're ready to go ahead and see if the full travel of the shock absorber will allow us to still engage the bump stop before my wheel actually hits the fender line. And so already I can notice that it's already rubbing here. It's already rubbing, and I'm pretty sure we are not bottomed out yet. So I'm actually gonna go ahead, take the wheel back off, adjust it so that the bottom mount is actually sitting a little bit lower, and then we're gonna go ahead and repeat the process again. Alright, so as you can see, I'm fully bottomed out on the shock absorber. The bump stop is engaged. The jack won't go up anymore, and there's no rubbing. Probably cleared by like just a few millimeters, but yeah, bump stop is fully engaged, so it's not rubbing. So now that we know that the shock absorber height is set on the bottom perch, we can go ahead and lock that. So that will give our total distance for play for full uncompress and compress. Now we can go ahead and reassemble everything with the springs on, and then we can go ahead and install everything else. So cool. Alright, hey guys, so after initially getting everything dialed in, so I had the bottom perch, the bottom mount, and the height in which the shock absorber will bottom out, that's all set. As far as the actual spring, so normally people would preload their spring, right? So you would, I'm just loosening the bottom one, but normally people would preload their spring by turning this a certain amount, and then that will set it, right? Then you adjust height by doing this. But instead, you're supposed to adjust height using the spring, and you leave this guy to adjust the shock absorber itself. So after doing that initially, so I had this initially set to where the springs were just engaged enough so that there's no play, because right now you can see there's play, but I had it where the spring was just enough so that there's no play, but there's still not a lot of preload. Now when I went ahead and dropped my car, I actually found that there's a pretty big gap, wheel gap, because the spring was sitting too high. But I actually need the spring to move down a little more, right? Because this will move the ride height right here. So I need this bottom part to go down. The problem is, right, if I move this down, now the spring becomes loose, right? And so that's not good, because when it's fully uncompressed, right, this is essentially what is going to happen. My spring is going to be free to move. So say like if I go over a bump, like, and then it drops real quick, this essentially is going to become unseated. Then when the wheel comes back up, essentially you're going to have to try and hopefully hope that everything lines up before it smashes together, right? So you're going to have to hope that everything aligns. So this top part has to align to go into here, and then each of these springs have their own little seating area that they need to go in. What's most likely going to happen is that nothing is going to line up. It's actually going to be like this. So right now that's fully seated, but it's probably going to end up like this, or maybe even like this, right? There's a good chance it might go like this, and when it fully compresses, you're going to end up damaging parts of your suspension. So the correct way to do this is actually with the help of what is called a keeper spring. Now the keeper spring actually goes on the bottom underneath the main spring. So the keeper spring, as you can see, very small, very thin. You can actually compress this pretty easily. Like I can close it all the way. Like it's very easy to compress. But the purpose of a keeper spring is actually to keep this spring up seated up against the top pad and the bottom half of the adjustment rings. So I'm going to go ahead and install this onto here. This is going to go like this. Alright, so went ahead, installed the keeper spring. The keeper spring will keep this spring always seated correctly in the top pad over here. So now I can go ahead and adjust my ride height. So I would essentially adjust this bottom one, knowing that this will always keep this assembly together when it's fully uncompressed. Like it is right now, it's fully uncompressed. So this keeper spring will always keep this compressed. So now I can go ahead and adjust the ride height. So I know I want it to come down maybe about 1.5 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that when this is fully compressed, it will come down about 1 inch. So. Hey everyone, so my camera died shortly after that last video clip, so I never got a chance to finish recording the installation of the coilover with the keeper spring on both the driver's side and the passenger side, but I did take photos. So here we are looking at the passenger side of the vehicle with the coilover and the wheels clearly showing that there's still a big wheel gap between the tire and the fender line. And so you can kind of see the keeper spring is fully compressed, and here we'll look at a closer view of the keeper spring. Because it is a softer spring rate, it does compress a lot easier, so this allows the spring and everything to sit a little bit lower, because the bottom locking ring is essentially lower than what it used to be at when it was just the original spring itself. And so you can kind of think of the keeper spring as an extension of the original spring, because the original spring only has a length of 200 millimeters, and I did need to move it down so that I can lower the ride height a lot more. And so here there's a photo of the suspension fully assembled, but it's uncompressed. And so you can see that the keeper spring is keeping the main spring seated up against the top hat of the coilover, and this just ensures that throughout the entire range of the suspension travel, that the spring will always be seated and will not become unseated in any way and cause potential damage to the suspension components or the body itself during any point of the suspension travel. And so I did end up playing with the ride height a little bit more, and I adjusted it so that it sits a little bit lower now as compared to before, as you can see here. And the ride height's pretty good, the ride quality is pretty good as well, and I found no issues whatsoever going over speed bumps or potholes, and it's pretty good so far. So that about wraps it up for this video, guys. Hope you found this video helpful and informative when it comes to adjusting your ride height on coilover suspensions. And so stay tuned for the next video. We will be doing a string alignment on my car using the string alignment products that I designed and built in the previous video. So stay tuned for that, and thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Shoots!